Putin's visit to Baku leads to 5 key takeaways. The reception given to Russian President Vladimir Putin in Azerbaijan is reserved only for friends and close allies. In Putin's own words, a warm, almost familial atmosphere for joint work was created. 5 areas of collaboration with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev stand out, all of which are extremely important for Russia. During the state visit, Presidents Putin and Aliyev visited the Cathedral of the Baku and Azerbaijan Diocese of the Russian Orthodox Church, a symbol that the Russian community in Baku is not being oppressed. In Azerbaijan, there are 324 schools with instruction in Russian, serving about 160,000 students. More than 800,000 students study Russian as a second language. In 26 universities in Azerbaijan, there are Russian-language departments where over 15,000 students are enrolled, Aliyev told reporters. The declaration adopted at the end of the visit contains mostly general statements. However, if we highlight substantive issues, there are at least 5. First, gas. For Azerbaijan, the most crucial aspects of these negotiations are related to the economy, primarily energy. Baku could negotiate with Russia on supplying Russian gas through its territory to Europe, explains Kamran Gazanov, a senior lecturer at the Department of Theory and History of Journalism at RUDN University, to the newspaper VZGLYAD. However, such a scenario seems unlikely. Perhaps the Azerbaijani gas pipelines aren't always fully loaded daily, but as far as I know, there aren't any significant free capacities overall. Azerbaijan built the TAP and TANAP pipeline systems to Europe for specific volumes from the Shah Deniz 2 field, and they are fully utilized. There may be a few million cubic meters of free capacity, but certainly not billions annually. The pipeline is generally full, explains Igor Yushkov, a lecturer at the Financial University and an expert at the National Energy Security Fund, to VZGLYAD. Theoretically, gas cooperation could involve swap operations, where Gazprom supplies gas to Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan sells it to Europe. However, Moscow currently has no need for this. Why would Gazprom do this? If the gas is sold by Azerbaijan's SOCAR, Gazprom would have to break its long-term contracts with European partners, Yushkov emphasizes. According to the expert, a more realistic scenario is an agreement where SOCAR acts as Gazprom's agent. That is, SOCAR would contract transit services, for example, from the operator of the Ukrainian gas transmission system and participate in auctions for transit capacities on behalf of Gazprom. But in reality, Gazprom would be the one doing the actual pumping, Yushkov concludes. If the parties indeed agree on such a format of cooperation, it would further demonstrate the extremely high level of trust between Moscow and Baku. Secondly, the transport corridor. Russia is interested in creating a north-south transit route through the Trans-Caucasus to the shores of the Indian Ocean. However, this transport project faces challenges due to the tensions between Iran and Azerbaijan, including the situation in Karabakh. Recently, Russian Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu visited both Iran and Azerbaijan. According to official reports, along with the situation in the Middle East, he discussed the transport corridor. It can be assumed that Shoigu achieved some preliminary agreements with Baku, and now Vladimir Putin intends, so to speak, to finalize the dialogue on this issue. The goal is to create a transport channel that serves Russia's interests, allowing us to export goods to the Indian Ocean and global markets while bypassing European ports, explains Nikita Mendkovich, head of the Eurasian Analytical Club, to the newspaper VZGLYAD. In turn, Azerbaijan has expressed its readiness to launch such a corridor. On Azerbaijani territory, both the railway and road segments of the North-South corridor have been fully implemented and are functioning successfully. We are currently actively working on modernizing the railway section of this corridor to increase its capacity. We're talking about the possibility of transporting 15 million tons of cargo annually or even more, up to 30 million tons, and this is quite realistic, emphasized Ilham Aliyev. At first glance, one might wonder why go through all this trouble when the Caspian Sea is available. Why does Russia need to extend the corridor to Iran via the intermediate link of Azerbaijan if it can use Caspian ports? But it's not that simple. The Trans-Caspian transit option has all the obvious advantages, except for one: delivery speed. It is significantly slowed down due to the need for transshipment in ports. Additionally, the active development of the Trans-Caspian route requires certain improvements in port infrastructure directly on the Caspian coast. Not to mention that on our side, we need to work on the river channels so that they can better accommodate heavy cargo ships traveling through Russian waters to the Caspian Sea, and from there to the Iranian coast, explains Nikita Mendkovich. The third aspect of the visit was the Karabakh issue. Russia is reasserting itself in the Armenian-Azerbaijani settlement. Over the past 2 years, the Europeans have somehow taken over the process, starting to monopolize it. This threatens Baku's interests because Washington and Brussels are critical of Azerbaijan regarding both the Armenian issue and human rights and democracy. France is outright hostile. In contrast, Russia approaches both issues from an objective standpoint and, as a neighbor, can serve as a guarantor of agreements. We've already seen the value of European guarantees through the example of the Minsk agreements, reminds Kamran Hassanov. In this regard, Moscow and Baku's interests partially align. Azerbaijan wants the settlement process to be administered by at least a neutral power like Russia to prevent Armenia from turning into a full-fledged American-French base, as envisioned by Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's regime. The fourth aspect of the visit is about image. By making visits to various parts of the world, China, East Asia, Central Asia, and now the South Caucasus, Putin is demonstrating that the world hasn't turned its back on Russia and that Russia is still present in the region. However, it's impossible to fly to Georgia due to the lack of diplomatic relations, and Armenia has joined the Rome Statute and is distancing itself from Russia, says Hassanov. According to him, if previously the relationship between Moscow and Baku was described as a strategic partnership, it is now explicitly emphasized as an alliance, because Russia has no actual allies in the South Caucasus apart from Azerbaijan. Some experts view Putin's visit to Azerbaijan as a sort of message to Armenia, not so much to Prime Minister Pashinyan, but to Armenian society. Russia is signaling that with Yerevan's current policies, it might reassess its priorities in the South Caucasus. Nature abhors a vacuum. Where Armenia loses its position due to Pashinyan's political maneuvering, contacts with Azerbaijan inevitably develop, says Mendkovich. Finally, the fifth aspect concerns Azerbaijan's future in Russian integration projects. Azerbaijan's entry into the Eurasian Economic Union, EAEU, is quite possible, given that economic cooperation between our countries is at a good level, Mendkovich believes. Vladimir Putin also emphasizes this point. Our trade turnover is just over $4 billion and is growing, having increased by 17% in the first half of this year alone. There are also over $4 billion in direct investments in Azerbaijan's economy. And of course, the nearly 1,300 enterprises with Russian participation operating in the Azerbaijani market indicate that our situation is developing positively and has good prospects for further growth, the Kremlin website quotes the Russian president. The question of Azerbaijan's potential membership in the Collective Security Treaty Organization, CSTO, is also hypothetically solvable, but only if Armenia exits the organization, which it seems to be planning, thereby removing the conflict of interests. However, the question remains, what guarantees will Azerbaijan provide to ensure that its interests align with those of the CSTO? What assurances are there that it won't become a complete vassal of Turkey and a platform for Turkish influence within Russian-led integration groups? Asks Mendkovich. This is a critical issue. Russian and Turkish integration projects in the post-Soviet space are in competition with each other. Given the consensus-based decision-making process within these organizations, Azerbaijan could potentially sabotage Russian projects, for instance, by obstructing deeper integration while favoring grandiose summits with empty rhetoric about eternal friendship. But this would only be the case if Baku chooses to become a vassal of Turkey. The entire purpose of Azerbaijan's rapprochement with Russia is, in fact, to step out from under Ankara's influence and reduce its dependency on Turkey. Azerbaijan is trying to avoid falling under Turkish subordination. This is why it is establishing allied relations with Russia and signaling that Moscow will not withdraw from the South Caucasus. By doing so, it demonstrates that it has other significant partners besides Turkey, says Kamran Hasanov. The question is whether this demonstration will translate into practical actions. The true extent of the processes set in motion during Vladimir Putin's visit to Azerbaijan will become clear over time.